jungle, how to do this assignment. First question you want to answer is, do you have confidence that the food you eat is clean, safe, and healthy? Why or why not? This is your opinion. Think of the food you're eating at home or you buy from the grocery store or a restaurant in that respective. Quickly through the PowerPoint here. We'll go through that real quick. Alright, so Upton St. Clair was a muck-raking journalist, meaning kind of like a journalist looking to kind of expose things, an author during the Progressive era. He was a socialist. He believed that government should facilitate people sharing wealth instead of allowing rich people to accumulate it, meaning government owns most of the businesses. There's no super rich, there's no super poor in society. That's kind of what a socialist is. Today's document we're going to look at comes from his novel The Jungle, in which he describes the hardships faced by immigrants who worked in Chicago's meat-packing factories. Sinclair wanted to build sympathy for workers, but his work was more effective motivating concerns about food safety. So his original goal was, hey, I want to bring attention to how hard these workers work and how difficult their jobs are. At the end of the day, people said that's disgusting. That means the meat we're eating is dirty, rotten, and not safe for us to eat. Shortly after The Jungle was published, Congress passed the Pure Food and Drug Act, which created the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, which is still around today, to regulate consumer products. Some vocabulary words we'll see is pickle room, place where meat is soaked in brine for canning. Scare one, almost none. Tuberculosis is a disease of the lungs. Quarter is a section of a dead cow. Rheumatism is a disease in which joints and muscles swell. Fertilizer is a material put on the soil to make plants grow. Vat is a large container, in this case a large container of acid. An exhibit is to show. Alright, so let's read this real quick. Alright, here we go. So The Jungle, Upton St. Clair, written in 1906. There were the men in the pickle rooms, for instance, where old Antinous had gotten his death. Scarce a one of these that had not some spot of horror of his person. Let a man so much as scrape his finger pushing a truck in the pickle rooms, and he might have a sore that would put him out of the world. All the joints in his finger might be eaten one by one. And floorsmen, the beef boners and trimmers, and all those who used knives, you could scarcely find a person who had the use of his thumb. Time and time again the base of it had been slashed. It was a mere lump of flesh against which the man pressed the knife to hold it. The hands of these men would be crisscrossed with cuts until you could no longer pretend to count them or to trace them. They would have no nails. They had worn them off, pulling hides. Their knuckles were swollen so that their fingers spread out like a fan. There were men who worked in the cooking rooms, in the midst of steam and sickening odors, by artificial light. In these rooms, the germs of tuberculosis might live for 2 years, but the supply was renewed every hour. There were beef luggers who carried 200-pound quarters into the refrigerator cars, a fearful kind of work that began at 4 o'clock in the morning and that wore out the most powerful men in a few years. There were those who worked in the chilling rooms and whose special disease was rheumatism. The time limit that a man could work in the chilling rooms was said to be 5 years. There were the wool pluckers whose hands went to pieces even sooner than the hands of the picklemen. For the pelts of the sheep had to be painted with acid to loosen the wool, and then the pluckers had to pull out this wool with their bare hands, till the acid had eaten their fingers off. There were those who made the tins for the canned meat, and their hands, too, were a maze of cuts, and each cut represented a chance for blood poisoning. Some worked at the stamping machines, and it was very seldom that one could work long there at the pace that was set, and not give out and forget himself, and have a part of his hand chopped off. There were the hoisters, as they were called, whose task it was to press the lever which lifted the dead cattle off the floor. They ran along upon a rafter, peering down through the damp and steam, and as old Durham's architects had not built the killing room for the convenience of the hoisters, at every few feet they would have to stoop under a beam, say 4 feet above the one they ran on, which got them into the habit of stooping, so that in a few years they would be walking like chimpanzees. Worst of any, however, were the fertilizer men. and those who served in the cooking rooms. These people could not be shown to the visitor, for the odor of a fertilizer man would scare any ordinary visitor at 100 yards. And as for the other men who worked in the tank rooms full of steam, and in some of which there were open vats near the level of the floor, their peculiar trouble was that they fell into the vats, and when they were fished out, there was never enough of them left to be worth exhibiting. Sometimes they would be overlooked for days till all but the bones of them had gone out to the world as Durham's pure leaf lard. So, I've answered questions 2 and 3 for you. This might be a good time to pause this video and copy these answers down. Let me get as much of it on the screen as possible. But you can see the pickle room workers had their fingers eaten by acid. They risked losing their thumbs, cuts all over their hands, no fingernails, swollen knuckles. The cooking room workers would get tuberculosis. The beef luggers would be worn out by the physical demands of the job, having to carry 200-pound pieces of cow all morning. The chilling room workers would get rheumatism. Remember, they could only work in there about 5 years before they just weren't capable of working in there anymore. The wool pluckers would tear up their hands. The acid that they used to pull the wool would eat their fingers off. Made tins for canned meats. They would get cuts on their hand, and they also risked blood poisoning. The stamping machines, doing the same repetitive job with a sharp instrument all day, would risk part of their hands being chopped off. The hoisters, because they always had to bend as they worked the rafters above the plant, would end up with really bad backs. And the fertilizer men risked falling into the vats of acid and having their bodies disintegrate away and being pulled out of that. So after the Food and Drug Act was passed, Sinclair said, "I aimed at the public's heart and by accident hit its stomach." What did he mean by that? And what he's saying is, I wrote this book to bring attention to these awful conditions the workers went through, and in the end they were more worried about the food. The readers were more worried about the food the workers were making might be dirty and not healthy because of the acid, mostly because of the blood and stuff like that. So his original intention for the book was passed over. Questions 4 and 5 are your opinion. So in your opinion, who do you think was best able to fix the dangerous conditions Sinclair described? The factory owners, the government itself, the workers themselves, journalists like Sinclair, or society as a whole? Explain why you picked one of those groups here. And then finally, which workers today may still face dangerous conditions? Think about it today. We've been talking, think of it in terms of this current situation in America. You saw Amazon workers go on strike recently, but you can think of any type of job. How could we change and improve these working conditions for these people? I hope this helped. Feel free to replay and do this, and redo this, and pause at questions 2 and 3 so you can get those down. 1, 4, and 5 are your opinion. Hope this helped. If you have any questions, email me.